The silence is the first lie. In the damp, cold heart of the Hürtgen Forest, November 1944, the silence is a thick wool blanket smothering the world. It is a deception. For the men of the 2nd Platoon, Baker Company, 22nd Infantry Regiment, this silence is more terrifying than the scream of an 88 or the staccato rip of a German MG-42. They are young men from places like Iowa and Ohio, Pennsylvania and Kansas, boys who grew up with the sounds of tractors and school bells, now swallowed by this primordial German wood, a place so dark and tangled it feels like the earth itself is against them. The trees, skeletal and black from endless shelling, stand as grim sentinels. The mud is a cold, clinging glue that steals boots and saps the will with every sucking step. They call it the green hell of the Eifel. They are lost, not just on their maps, but in this war. Their mission was simple on paper: push through the forest, clear a path to the Rohr River. But the forest has other plans. It's a labyrinth of German bunkers, hidden machine gun nests, and sniper positions. Every shadow could conceal a death waiting to happen. And in the heart of this platoon, a boy named Leo Jenkins, just 17 years old, from a small farm outside Biloxi, Mississippi, feels the weight of the silence more than anyone. He is the platoon scout. His eyes, young and sharp, are their early warning system. But what can I see in this gloom? He moves a few yards ahead of the main group, his M1 Garand feeling like a ton of steel in his hands, his heart hammering a rhythm that seems to echo in the oppressive quiet. He's not a soldier, he's a kid who lied about his age to get here, fueled by newsreels and a sense of duty. Now, that duty feels like a death sentence. He scans the tree line, the fallen logs, the craters filled with oily water. Nothing moves. But the feeling? The feeling is a cold snake coiling in his gut. It's the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. This isn't the silence of an empty wood. It's the silence of a predator holding its breath. Back with the main body, Sergeant Makovsky, a hardened veteran of North Africa and Normandy, feels it too. He holds up a clenched fist, and the 28 men behind him freeze in place, their breath pluming in the frigid air. They are strung out along a narrow, muddy trail, a perfect target. "Jenkins," Makovsky hisses, the sound barely carrying. "See anything?" Leo doesn't turn. He just shakes his head slowly, his eyes never stopping their sweep. "Nothing, Sarge. It's too quiet." A veteran named Kowalski spits into the mud. "It's always too quiet before the shitstorm." And that's when Leo sees it. A flicker. Not a movement, but a break in the pattern. A few yards ahead, a patch of ferns. They are all drooping, heavy with the morning's frost. Except for one. A single broad leaf is clean, its surface unblemished by moisture, as if it had recently been brushed against, wiping the dew away. His blood runs cold. It could be an animal, a deer. But there are no deer in the Hürtgen. They've all been scared off or blown to pieces. This was man-made. He drops to a knee, his signal for the platoon to halt. He raises his hand, pointing 2 fingers towards the suspicious ferns. Makovsky sees the signal and his jaw tightens. He knows Jenkins' instincts are good. The kid has a feel for this. But time is pressure. Command wants them moving. They are behind schedule. Every minute spent frozen in this clearing is a minute the Germans have to tighten the noose. "What is it, son?" Makovsky whispers, moving up cautiously to join him. Leo doesn't speak. He just points again, more insistently at the leaf, then sweeps his hand slowly, indicating the entire tree line ahead. It's not just one leaf. It's a pattern. A path of subtly disturbed foliage leading up a slight incline to their left. A perfect, concealed firing position overlooking the trail they are about to walk down. It's a killing zone. A classic L-shaped ambush. The main assault would come from the front, pinning them down, while that elevated position on the flank would rake their entire column with enfilading fire. They would be slaughtered in minutes, caught in a crossfire they couldn't escape. The platoon is poised on a razor's edge, their young lives hanging on the interpretation of a single dewless leaf. Sergeant Rakoski has a choice to make. Trust the gut feeling of a 17-year-old kid and risk being wrong, halting their advance on a phantom, or order the men forward, gambling that the silence is just that, silence. He looks at Jenkins, sees the absolute certainty in the boy's wide, frightened eyes. He makes his decision. "Platoon, hold position," he orders, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. But it's too late. A sudden, sharp crack echoes through the forest. Not a rifle shot. The sound of a boot snapping a twig. It didn't come from the front. It came from behind them. They weren't just about to walk into an ambush. They were already in it. The trap was about to be sprung from all sides, and the first metallic clatter of a machine gun bolt being cocked echoed from the trees to their rear, sealing their fate.
That single, deliberate sound, the cocking of a machine gun, shattered the illusion of silence and froze the blood in every man's veins. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, locking them in a cage of their own making. Time seemed to warp, stretching that 1 second into an eternity of dreadful understanding. They were surrounded. The carefully laid trap was not just a head on the trail, it was a complete encirclement. The German force, likely a seasoned platoon from the 275th Infantry Division, knew these woods intimately. They had let the Americans walk right into the heart of their kill zone, herding them like sheep to the slaughter. From behind, a German voice barked a sharp command, "Feuer!" and hell erupted. The forest exploded with noise and fire. From the rear, the terrifying, rapid burp of an MG-42, the Hitler's buzzsaw, tore into the platoon's tail end. The sound is unmistakable, a ripping canvas of sound that drowns out all else. The air was instantly thick with the whine of bullets, the splintering of trees, and the sickening thuds of lead finding flesh. Men screamed, not in pain at first, but in sheer primal terror. They hit the mud, scrambling for cover that wasn't there. The trail was a death trap. "Return fire! Find cover!" Mikowski roared, his voice cracking with the strain. But what cover? The fallen logs were pre-sighted by German snipers. The craters offered minimal protection from the flanking fire that now rained down from the elevated position Leo had spotted. A hailstorm of potato masher grenades arced through the skeletal branches, exploding in deafening concussions of dirt and shrapnel. The world dissolved into a chaos of muzzle flashes, smoke, and the coppery smell of blood. Leo was flat on his stomach, his face pressed into the cold, wet earth. Dirt kicked up around him, stinging his cheeks. He saw Private Miller, a kid from Wisconsin he'd shared the cigarette with just an hour ago, take a round through the throat and crumple without a sound. He saw Kowalski firing his bar from the hip, a look of feral rage on his face, before a sniper's bullet punched through his helmet and he went down hard. This was it. This was the end. In 5 minutes, maybe less, the 2nd platoon would be a footnote, another line on a casualty report. They were being methodically cut to pieces. But in the midst of this storm of steel, Leo's mind, paralyzed with fear just moments before, began to work with a cold, terrifying clarity. The initial panic was burned away by the adrenaline surging through his system. He was the scout. He was the one who was supposed to see this. His failure felt like a physical weight. But his survival instinct, honed by a youth spent hunting in the Mississippi backwoods, kicked in. He wasn't just a target, he was a set of eyes. He raised his head just enough to scan, his brain filtering out the chaos, looking for patterns. The heaviest fire was coming from the rear, the MG-42, and from the elevated flank. But the flanking fire was more sporadic, more aimed. The rear gun was for suppression, to keep them pinned. The flankers were for the kill. He belly-crawled through the mud, ignoring the zip and crack of bullets, until he reached Sergeant Mikowski, who was firing short, controlled bursts with his M1. "Sarge," Leo yelled over the din, "the flank, it's the key. The MG in the rear has us pinned, but the guys on the hill are picking us off." Mikowski, his face a mask of grime and fury, nodded. He saw it too. But what could they do? A direct assault up that slope was suicide. A retreat back down the trail was a meat grinder. They were caught in a perfect, murderous crossfire. "We need to take out that MG," Mikowski shouted. "We can't, it's too well protected," Leo countered, his voice surprisingly steady. "But the flank, I saw the path, it's narrow. They're focused on us down here. If one guy could get up there, behind them." He left the thought hanging. It was madness. A single man moving through a gauntlet of fire to take on an entrenched German position from behind. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only move on the board. Mikowski looked at the boy. 17 years old. He should be worrying about prom, not plotting a solo assault against a squad of veteran German infantry. But in Leo's eyes, he didn't see a boy. He saw a soldier. He saw their only chance. "Jenkins, you sure?" Leo nodded, his jaw set. He wasn't sure at all. He was terrified. But the alternative was to die here in the mud, and that was not an option. "Give me 2 guys with grenades. Create a diversion at the front. Make a lot of noise. Make them think we're trying to push forward. It might draw their attention for a few seconds. It's all I'll need." Mikowski didn't hesitate. He barked orders to 2 riflemen, Simpson and Reyes. "You two, on my mark, pop smoke and lay down fire straight ahead. Make it sound like the whole damn platoon is charging. Jenkins, you go on my signal. And may God be with you, son." Leo checked his gear. He slung his M1 Garand over his shoulder. It would be too cumbersome. He drew his M1911 pistol, a more manageable weapon for close quarters work. He pulled the pins on 2 of his fragmentation grenades, carefully resecuring the spoons, ready for a quick throw. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting of cordite and pine. This was it, the point of no return. Simpson hurled a smoke grenade. A thick white plume began to billow across the trail, providing a momentary screen. "Now!" Mikowski yelled. Simpson and Reyes stood up, screaming at the top of their lungs, firing their rifles on full auto into the empty tree line ahead. The German fire intensified, shifting slightly to meet this new apparent threat. It was the moment Leo needed. He didn't look back. He pushed himself up, and in a low, silent crouch, he broke from the relative safety of the platoon's position and vanished into the thick, unforgiving undergrowth, leaving the sounds of battle behind him as he began his solitary, desperate climb towards the German flank. The fate of every man he called a brother now resting squarely on his young shoulders as he disappeared into the green hell, completely alone.
The world narrowed to a tunnel of mud, thorns, and the frantic beating of his own heart. As soon as Leo left the smoky chaos of the trail, the sounds of the firefight became muffled, distorted by the dense foliage. It was like diving underwater. His senses heightened to an almost painful degree. Every rustle of a leaf under his boot sounded like a thunderclap. Every gasp of his own breath seemed to echo in the stillness. He was moving through a different world now, a shadow world parallel to the battle, a world where silence was his only ally and any sound would be his death sentence. He used the terrain as his weapon, staying low, moving from the cover of one massive moss-covered tree trunk to the next. The map of the German position he had mentally sketched was his guide. He was circling wide, aiming to come up behind and to the side of the elevated flanking force. The ground was steep, slippery with wet leaves and hidden roots that seemed to reach up and grab at his ankles. Thorns ripped at his uniform and tore the skin on his hands, but he barely felt them. His entire being was focused on one thing: movement, stealth. He was no longer Leo Jenkins from Biloxi. He was a predator, stalking his prey. The sounds of the battle were his compass. The sporadic, aimed rifle fire from the German flankers grew louder, guiding him in. He could now pick out individual shots, the deeper crack of a Mauser Kar-98K, the sharper report of a Gewehr 43 semi-automatic. He estimated their number. At least 5, maybe 6 men, a full squad. He was one boy with a pistol and 2 grenades. The odds were impossible, but he had the element of surprise. They were focused on the fish in the barrel below. They weren't looking for a shark circling behind them. He slowed his advance, his movements becoming even more deliberate. He placed each foot with excruciating care, testing the ground before shifting his weight. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. He could hear the Germans now, not just their weapons, but their voices. Guttural, confident shouts. They were calling out targets, relaying information. They were efficient, professional. They had done this before. Leo's mouth was dry as dust. He felt a tremor in his hands and willed it to stop. Focus. Breathe. You've done this before. But he hadn't. He'd hunted white-tailed deer, not men. This was different. This was the ultimate hunt. He finally reached a small ridge overlooking the German position. Peering through a thicket of brambles, his breath caught in his throat. There they were. 6 German soldiers, dug into a well-camouflaged firing line. 2 were riflemen, carefully picking shots at the pinned-down Americans below. Another was a spotter, using binoculars to direct fire. And 2 more were manning an MG-34, its bipod dug firmly into the earth, its deadly barrel sweeping the trail. The 6th man appeared to be an NCO, a Feldwebel, barking orders and watching the battle unfold with a cold, calculating gaze. They were perfectly positioned. From this vantage point, they had a clear line of fire down the entire length of the American platoon. They were the hammer to the anvil of the MG-42 at the rear. Every few seconds, the machine gun would chatter, and Leo would flinch, imagining the carnage it was causing among his friends. He had to act, now. But how? A direct charge was suicide. He'd be cut down before he took 2 steps. His grenades were his best bet, but he had to make them count. He had to take out the machine gun crew first. They were the most immediate threat. He slowly, silently unslung the 2 grenades from his webbing. His hands were slick with sweat. He wiped them on his trousers. This was it, the moment of truth. 1 grenade for the machine gun nest, the second for the cluster of riflemen. He would have to throw them in quick succession, then use the confusion to engage any survivors with his pistol. It was a plan born of desperation, a Hail Mary pass with the lives of 28 men riding on its success. He took a final deep breath, his fingers finding the cool, rough surface of the grenade pins. He could see the German Feldwebel light a cigarette, confident in their victory, utterly unaware of the death that was mere yards away. Leo pulled the pin on the first grenade, the spoon flying off with a soft metallic sprong that sounded deafening in his ears. He didn't wait. He rose to his knees, arm cocked back. He had a clear line of sight. The MG-34 crew was reloading, one man feeding a fresh belt of ammunition into the receiver. It was now or never. He hurled the grenade with all his strength. A high, arcing toss meant to land right in the heart of the machine gun nest. Time seemed to slow. The olive-drab sphere tumbled end over end, a silent, spinning omen of death against the gray German sky. The throw was perfect. It was going to land right between the 2 gunners. But just as it left his hand, one of the German riflemen, turning to say something to his comrade, caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. His head snapped around. His eyes widened in shock and horror. He opened his mouth to scream a warning, his finger tightening on the trigger of his rifle, swinging the barrel towards the 17-year-old boy who had just appeared, as if from nowhere, behind their lines. The German soldier's shout was a strangled, guttural cry of alarm, cut short by the deafening blast of the first grenade. It landed exactly where Leo had aimed, right in the center of the machine gun nest. The explosion was a concussive crump that ripped through the German position. Dirt, pine needles, and metal shrapnel erupted outwards. The two MG-34 gunners were thrown backward like rag dolls, their bodies shredded by the blast. The machine gun itself was flung into the air, landing in a twisted, silent heap of metal. The spotter, standing too close, was caught in the lethal spray and went down screaming. For a single, frozen second, there was stunned silence on the ridge. The remaining Germans, the Feldwebel, the two riflemen, and the one who had spotted Leo, were momentarily paralyzed by the shock of the attack from their rear. Their perfect, secure position had been violated. But that paralysis lasted only a heartbeat. The Feldwebel, a veteran of the Eastern Front, recovered first. He dropped his cigarette and dove for cover behind a tree, screaming orders in German. The two riflemen, including the one who had seen Leo, scrambled for their weapons. The one who had spotted him was the fastest. He brought his K98K to his shoulder, his eyes locking onto Leo, who was still exposed from his throw. Leo saw the movement, saw the long, dark barrel of the rifle swinging towards him. Instinct took over. Training he didn't even know he had kicked in. He didn't try to aim his pistol. He dropped flat to the ground as the rifle shot cracked, the bullet snapping the air just inches above his head, tearing through the brambles where he had been kneeling. He was now in a desperate firefight. He had one grenade left and his .45 caliber pistol against at least 3 seasoned German infantrymen. He was outgunned and outnumbered. The element of surprise was gone. Now it was a brutal fight for survival. "Simpson! Reyes! Suppressing fire on that ridge! Now!" Sergeant Makovsky's voice boomed from below, having heard the grenade blast and the shift in the German fire. A renewed volley of American rifle fire peppered the German position, not aimed to hit, but to keep their heads down. It was the break Leo needed. While the Germans were momentarily distracted by the fire from below, Leo scrambled on his hands and knees, moving laterally along the ridge, trying to change his position. He could hear the Feldwebel shouting, trying to reorganize his shattered squad. One of the riflemen was firing blindly in Leo's general direction, bullets chewing up the dirt and vegetation around him. Leo popped up from behind a fallen log, his M1911 gripped in both hands. He saw a German helmet, aimed, and fired. The pistol bucked in his hand with a loud, satisfying bang. The German soldier cried out and dropped his rifle, clutching his shoulder. One down, but not out. The Feldwebel returned fire with his MP-40 submachine gun, a short, controlled burst that splintered the log in front of Leo's face, forcing him back down. He was pinned. He had to use his last grenade, but he had to make it count. He couldn't just throw it blindly. He needed a target. He risked another glance. The Feldwebel was keeping him suppressed with intermittent bursts from the MP-40, while the unwounded rifleman was maneuvering, trying to get a clean angle on him. They were working as a team, and they were good. They were flanking him. In seconds, he would be caught in a crossfire on this ridge, just as his platoon had been on the trail. This was it. This was the end of the line. He looked at his last grenade. It was their only chance. His only chance. He made a decision. A crazy, suicidal decision. He wouldn't throw it. He would charge. He would use the explosion as his cover. It was a move born of pure, unadulterated desperation. He pulled the pin, held the spoon down. He could feel the live grenade in his hand, a tangible weight of destruction. He took one last, deep breath, said a silent prayer to a God he hadn't spoken to in months, and stood up. He didn't run away. He ran directly towards the German position. The Feldwebel's eyes widened in utter disbelief. He was looking at a madman. An American soldier, a boy, was charging his position, holding a live grenade aloft. The German rifleman, caught off guard, fumbled with his bolt-action rifle. Leo ran, his legs pumping, his heart hammering against his ribs. He covered 10 yards, then 15. The Feldwebel swung his MP40 around, a snarl on his face. He was going to cut this fool down. But Leo was already committed. With a guttural scream that tore from the depths of his soul, a scream of fear and rage and a fierce, burning will to live, he released the spoon on the grenade, let it cook off for a 1 Mississippi count, and hurled it, not at the Germans, but at the base of the large tree the Feldwebel was using for cover. He then threw himself sideways, diving behind a small rocky outcrop as the world behind him dissolved into a firestorm of shrapnel and splintered wood. The blast was immense. The concussion wave hit him like a physical blow, knocking the wind from his lungs and filling his ears with a high-pitched ringing. Dirt and debris rained down on him. For a moment, there was only silence, a ringing, hollow silence. He pushed himself up, his ears bleeding, his head spinning. He grabbed his pistol, which he had miraculously held onto, and staggered to his feet. The scene before him was one of utter devastation. The tree was shattered. The Feldwebel was gone, vaporized by the blast. The wounded rifleman lay still. The other rifleman was stumbling, dazed and bleeding, his rifle missing. The flanking position had been obliterated. Leo had done it. He had single-handedly neutralized the German flank attack. But as the dust settled and the ringing in his ears subsided, a new sound reached him. It wasn't the sound of the MG-42 from the rear. That had fallen silent too. It was the sound of something else, something worse. The distinctive, high-revving clatter of German armored vehicles, and the shouts of fresh infantry moving up the trail from the direction of the original ambush. The Germans weren't retreating, they were reinforcing. They were reinforcing the job. And Leo was now isolated, behind enemy lines, with a single clip in his pistol and a new, even deadlier threat rolling straight towards what was left of his platoon. The metallic growl of the approaching engines was a sound that struck a primal chord of fear in every soldier who had faced the blitzkrieg. It was the sound of inevitability, of rolling, unstoppable steel. From his position on the shattered ridge, Leo saw them. 2 SDKFZ 251 half-tracks, their boxy, armored forms crunching through the undergrowth, followed by a squad of fresh German infantry moving with disciplined purpose. They were coming to sweep up the remnants of the American platoon to ensure no one escaped the trap. The half-tracks mounted MG-34s, and their presence turned a desperate infantry fight into a hopeless one. Down on the trail, Sergeant Makovsky heard it too. His heart sank. The brief respite gained by Leo's miraculous takedown of the flanking position was over. The silencing of the rear MG-42 had been a temporary blessing, likely because its crew was low on ammunition or repositioning. But this was a death knell. His men were battered, bleeding, and low on ammo. They could not stand against armored vehicles. "Fall back!" Makovsky roared, his voice hoarse. "Disengage! Fall back by fire teams! Kowalski, Reyes, cover us!" But there was nowhere to fall back to. The trail behind them was still a dangerous gauntlet, and the Germans were now advancing from both front and rear. They were in a collapsing pocket. Leo watched the scene unfold with a sense of horror. He had climbed this hill to save his platoon, and it seemed he had only delayed the inevitable. He was a spectator to his own failure. But then his eyes once again saw what others did not. The lead half-track was forcing its way up the narrow trail, its tracks churning the deep mud. It was having difficulty. The driver was focused on navigating the treacherous, shell-pocked path. The infantry following it were keeping close for cover. Their attention focused on the American positions ahead. They had no reason to look up. They had no idea that the flanking position had been annihilated. They had no idea a lone American scout was watching them from above. An idea, wild and reckless, sparked in Leo's mind. It was even more insane than his grenade charge. But it was the only card left to play. The half-tracks. If he could disable one, or better yet, both, he could create a roadblock. He could bottle up the German reinforcements on the narrow trail, buying the platoon the precious minutes they needed to break contact and escape. But how? He had no anti-tank weapons, no bazooka, no mines, just his pistol and the Germans' own weapons. His eyes fell on the carnage of the flanking position. The MG-34 was destroyed, but the dead Germans had other gear. Potato masher grenades. Their distinctive wooden handles and cylindrical explosive charges were designed for throwing. And he saw something else. A Panzerfaust. A single-shot, disposable German anti-tank weapon. One of the Germans must have been carrying it, perhaps in case American armor appeared. It was lying near the body of the Feldwebel, partially buried in dirt. It was a gift from heaven, a chance. He scrambled over to it, his body aching from the grenade blast. He picked up the Panzerfaust. It was heavy, crude, and intimidating. He'd never fired one before. He'd only seen them in training manuals. It was simple in principle. Point the large warhead at the target, aim through the simple sight, and press the firing button. But it had a massive backblast. He would be exposing his position completely, and he only had one shot. He grabbed 2 potato masher grenades as well, shoving them into his belt. He then moved to the edge of the ridge, finding a new firing position that gave him a clear line of sight down onto the trail where the half-tracks were advancing. The lead vehicle was now almost directly below him. He could see the driver's face, pale and focused inside his open hatch. The second half-track was close behind, its machine gunner scanning the trees. This was it. He had to take the shot. He hefted the Panzerfaust onto his shoulder, the weight unfamiliar and awkward. He extended the sight, lining up the target. He aimed not for the heavily sloped front armor, but for the thinner side armor of the lead half-track, right amidships. His hands were trembling. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and steadied himself. He could hear the screams of his friends below, the crack of rifle fire, the revving of the German engines. He blocked it all out. There was only the sight, the target, and his finger on the trigger. He pressed the firing button. There was a tremendous whoosh, and a jet of flame erupted from the rear of the tube, scorching the earth behind him. The warhead shot out, a smoking projectile streaking towards its target. The world seemed to hold its breath. The shot was true. It struck the lead half-track square on its side with a deafening crump. A flash of light, then a secondary explosion as the vehicle's fuel or ammunition cooked off. The half-track shuddered to a halt, belching black smoke and flames. The German infantry scattered, diving for cover, their advance suddenly and violently halted. The second half-track, trapped behind the burning wreck, slammed to a stop. Leo didn't wait to see the results. He dropped the now useless Panzerfaust tube and grabbed the potato masher grenades. He pulled the cords and hurled them down into the cluster of disoriented German infantry. The twin explosions sowed further chaos and confusion. He had done it. He had created a bottleneck. The German reinforcements were stuck, their armored support neutralized, their infantry pinned down by the unexpected attack from above. Down below, Sergeant Mikowski saw the lead half-track erupt in flames. He didn't know how or why, but he knew it was Jenkins. It had to be. The kid was a one-man army. "Now! Now! Go! Go! Go!" he screamed, rallying his men. This was their chance. This was the miracle they needed. The platoon, infused with a sudden, desperate hope, began a fighting withdrawal, laying down a furious wall of fire as they fell back down the trail, away from the ambush site, away from the burning wreck and the stalled German advance. But as Leo watched them go, a wave of exhaustion and relief washing over him, a new problem presented himself. He was now the only American on the wrong side of a burning German half-track, with a very angry and now alerted German platoon between him and his retreating friends. His escape route was cut off. He was alone, behind enemy lines, with the entire German force now aware of his presence and definitely very, very eager to find him. The brief, glorious moment of victory curdled into the cold, hard reality of his situation. Leo was isolated. The path back to his platoon was now a torrent of enemy soldiers, enraged and hunting for the source of the devastating attack that had crippled their reinforcement. Shouts in German echoed up the ridge, sharp and urgent. They knew he was up here. The crack of rifle fire started again, but this time it was aimed at him. Bullets smacked into the trees around his position, chewing up the bark. He was the target now. He had to move. He had to disappear. He scrambled back from the ridge's edge, keeping low. His mind, though fogged with exhaustion and fear, was racing. He couldn't go back the way he came. That area would be swarming with Germans. He had to go deeper, deeper into the Hürtgen, away from the battle, away from his friends. The concept was terrifying. To be alone in this green hell, with no food, little ammunition, and every living soul a potential enemy? But it was his only chance. Survival was now the only mission. He oriented himself using the position of the weak, gray winter sun filtering through the canopy. West. The American lines were somewhere to the west. It was a vague, almost meaningless direction in this trackless forest, but it was all he had. He began to move, not with the deliberate stealth of before, but with a frantic, desperate urgency. He was a rabbit running from the hounds. The sounds of the German search party grew louder behind him. They were fanning out, moving up the ridge. They would find the bodies of their comrades. They would find the spent Panzerfaust. They would know it was the work of a single, determined soldier, and their bloodlust would be immense. Leo crashed through the undergrowth, no longer caring about the noise, only about putting distance between himself and his pursuers. Thorns ripped at his skin, branches lashed his face. He fell, tripping over a hidden root, and landed hard, the wind knocked out of him. For a moment, he lay there, panting, listening. He could hear them. They were close, too close. He pushed himself up and ran again, his lungs burning. He came to a small, freezing creek, its water running black with the tannins of the forest. He didn't hesitate. He waded in, the icy water shocking his system, soaking him to the bone. He moved upstream, hoping the water would mask his trail and throw off any trackers. The cold was a new enemy, sapping his strength, making his teeth chatter. After 100 yards, he scrambled out on the far bank, his boots heavy with water, and collapsed behind a large fallen pine tree. He listened. The sounds of pursuit seemed to have faded, muffled by the gurgle of the creek. Had he lost them? He dared to hope. He checked his pistol. He had only 3 rounds left in the magazine. 3 rounds. That was his entire world. He was shivering uncontrollably now, the cold and the adrenaline crash taking their toll. The bravado and battle fury had evaporated, leaving behind a scared, exhausted 17-year-old boy alone in the heart of enemy territory. He thought of home. He thought of the warm Mississippi sun, his mother's cooking, his dog Buster waiting for him on the porch. It felt like a lifetime ago, a dream from another world. A world he would never see again if he didn't find a way out of this. He had to keep moving. He couldn't stay here. He forced his numb, aching body to move. He stood up, using the tree for support, and began to walk, stumbling, towards the west. The forest seemed endless, a repeating pattern of identical trees, mud, and despair. He walked for what felt like hours, his sense of time completely distorted. The gray daylight began to fade, the shadows lengthening and merging into an early, deep twilight. The temperature dropped sharply. If he didn't find shelter, he would freeze to death before the Germans ever found him. He was about to give up, to simply lie down and let the cold take him, when he saw it. A flicker of orange light through the trees. A campfire. His heart leapt. Americans? Had he somehow made it? He moved towards it, a new, cautious hope kindling in his chest. He used the last of his strength to creep closer, using the trees for cover. He peered through a thick bush, and his hope instantly turned to ice in his veins. It wasn't an American camp. It was a German one. A small, temporary bivouac for a squad, maybe the very ones who had been pursuing him. 4 soldiers were huddled around the fire, heating rations, their rifles stacked nearby. They were relaxed, laughing, thinking the danger was past. They had no idea the ghost who had destroyed their half-track was watching them from barely 30 yards away. Leo sank back into the shadows, his mind reeling. He was trapped. He was cold, starving, and armed with only 3 bullets. He couldn't go around them. The terrain was too thick. He couldn't go back. He was too exhausted. He was surrounded by the enemy, with night falling fast and the temperature plummeting towards freezing. His miraculous escape had led him straight into the lion's den, and now, with the darkness as his only cover, he had to make a choice. Surrender, try to slip past them, or use his last 3 bullets to fight his way through. The German soldier's shout was a strangled, guttural cry of alarm, cut short by the deafening blast of the first grenade. It landed exactly where Leo had aimed, right in the center of the machine gun nest. The explosion was a concussive crump that ripped through the German position. Dirt, pine needles, and metal shrapnel erupted outwards. The 2 MG-34 gunners were thrown backward like rag dolls, their bodies shredded by the blast. The machine gun itself was flung into the air, landing in a twisted, silent heap of metal. The spotter, standing too close, was caught in the lethal spray and went down screaming. For a single, frozen second, there was stunned silence on the ridge. The remaining Germans, the Feldwebel, the 2 riflemen, and the one who had spotted Leo, were momentarily paralyzed by the shock of the attack from their rear. Their perfect, secure position had been violated. But that paralysis lasted only a heartbeat. The Feldwebel, a veteran of the Eastern Front, recovered first. He dropped his cigarette and dove for cover behind a tree, screaming orders in German. The 2 riflemen, including the one who had seen Leo, scrambled for their weapons. The one who had spotted him was the fastest. He brought his Kar 98K to his shoulder, his eyes locking onto Leo, who was still exposed from his throw. Leo saw the movement, saw the long, dark barrel of the rifle swinging towards him. Instinct took over. Training he didn't even know he had kicked in. He didn't try to aim his pistol. He dropped flat to the ground as the rifle shot cracked, the bullet snapping the air just inches above his head, tearing through the brambles where he had been kneeling. He was now in a desperate firefight. He had 1 grenade left and his .45 caliber pistol against at least 3 seasoned German infantrymen. He was outgunned and outnumbered. The element of surprise was gone. Now it was a brutal fight for survival. "Simpson, Reyes, suppressing fire on that ridge, now!" Sergeant Mikowski's voice boomed from below, having heard the grenade blast and the shift in the German fire. A renewed volley of American rifle fire peppered the German position, not aimed to hit, but to keep their heads down. It was the break Leo needed. While the Germans were momentarily distracted by the fire from below, Leo scrambled on his hands and knees, moving laterally along the ridge, trying to change his position. He could hear the Feldwebel shouting, trying to reorganize his shattered squad. One of the riflemen was firing blindly in Leo's general direction, bullets chewing up the dirt and vegetation around him. Leo popped up from behind a fallen log, his M1911 gripped in both hands. He saw a German helmet, aimed, and fired. The pistol bucked in his hand with a loud, satisfying bang. The German soldier cried out and dropped his rifle, clutching his shoulder. One down, but not out. The Feldwebel returned fire with his MP-40 submachine gun, a short, controlled burst that splintered the log in front of Leo's face, forcing him back down. He was pinned. He had to use his last grenade, but he had to make it count. He couldn't just throw it blindly. He needed a target. He risked another glance. The Feldwebel was keeping him suppressed with intermittent bursts from the MP-40, while the unwounded rifleman was maneuvering, trying to get a clean angle on him. They were working as a team, and they were good. They were flanking him. In seconds, he would be caught in a crossfire on this ridge, just as his platoon had been on the trail. This was it. This was the end of the line. He looked at his last grenade. It was their only chance. His only chance. He made a decision. A crazy, suicidal decision. He wouldn't throw it. He would charge. He would use the explosion as his cover. It was a move born of pure, unadulterated desperation. He pulled the pin, held the spoon down. He could feel the live grenade in his hand, a tangible weight of destruction. He took one last, deep breath, said a silent prayer to a God he hadn't spoken to in months, and stood up. He didn't run away. He ran directly towards the German position. The Feldwebel's eyes widened in utter disbelief. He was looking at a madman. An American soldier, a boy, was charging his position, holding a live grenade aloft. The German rifleman, caught off guard, fumbled with his bolt-action rifle. Leo ran, his legs pumping, his heart hammering against his ribs. He covered 10 yards, then 15. The Feldwebel swung his MP-40 around, a snarl on his face. He was going to cut this fool down. But Leo was already committed. With a guttural scream that tore from the depths of his soul, a scream of fear and rage and a fierce, burning will to live, he released the spoon on the grenade, let it cook off for a 1 Mississippi count, and hurled it not at the Germans, but at the base of the large tree the Feldwebel was using for cover. He then threw himself sideways, diving behind a small rocky outcrop as the world behind him dissolved into a firestorm of shrapnel and splintered wood. The blast was immense. The concussion wave hit him like a physical blow, knocking the wind from his lungs and filling his ears with a high-pitched ringing. Dirt and debris rained down on him. For a moment, there was only silence, a ringing, hollow silence. He pushed himself up, his ears bleeding, his head spinning. He grabbed his pistol, which he had miraculously held onto, and staggered to his feet. The scene before him was one of utter devastation. The tree was shattered. The Feldwebel was gone, vaporized by the blast. The wounded rifleman lay still. The other rifleman was stumbling, dazed and bleeding, his rifle missing. The flanking position had been obliterated. Leo had done it. He had single-handedly neutralized the German flank attack. But as the dust settled and the ringing in his ears subsided, a new sound reached him. It wasn't the sound of the MG-42 from the rear. That had fallen silent too. It was the sound of something else, something worse. The distinctive, high-revving clatter of German armored vehicles and the shouts of fresh infantry moving up the trail from the direction of the original ambush. The Germans weren't retreating. They were reinforcing. They were sending in the reserves to finish the job. And Leo was now isolated behind enemy lines with a single clip in his pistol and a new, even deadlier threat rolling straight towards what was left of his platoon. The German officer stood silhouetted against the dancing firelight, a specter of cold, professional admiration. He was a Hauptmann, a captain, his insignia just visible. He was not part of the grunt squad. He was their commander, and he had been using them as bait. "I lost 6 good men to your little stunt on the ridge," the captain continued, his tone conversational, almost friendly, but his eyes were like chips of flint. "And a very expensive half-track. I had to see the architect of such chaos for myself. And to find he is merely a child, astonishing." Sergeant Mikowski slowly moved his hand towards his own sidearm, but the German officer tutted softly and raised the muzzle of his MP40 a fraction of an inch. Ah, Sergeant, let's not make this messy. Your men are tired. My men are displeased. Lower your weapons." From the shadows around the clearing, more German soldiers materialized, at least a full squad, their rifles aimed at Mikowski, Reyes, and Simpson. They were surrounded. Again. The rescue had become a catastrophe. Leo felt a crushing wave of despair. After everything, it was all for nothing. They were all going to be captured or shot. The captain's gaze returned to Leo. "You have a talent, boy, a natural instinct for war. It would be a shame to waste it in a prisoner camp, or to end it here, in this miserable forest." He took a step closer. "Surrender. Tell your friends to stand down. It is over." Leo's mind raced, but it was a bird trapped in a cage, beating against the bars. There were no more tricks, no more grenades, no more Panzerfausts. He was out of options. He looked at Mikowski, whose face was a stony mask of defiance. He looked at Reyes and Simpson, who looked back at him, their eyes filled with a desperate trust. They had come back for him. He couldn't let them die for nothing. He had to do something, anything. His eyes darted around the clearing, looking for anything he could use. The fire, the stacked German rifles, the bodies. And then he saw it. Lying next to the body of the German he had first shot was the man's weapon, a fully loaded MP40 submachine gun. It was only 10 feet away, but it might as well have been 10 miles. The German captain followed his gaze and smiled a thin, cold smile. "I see it too. Do not be a fool. You would be dead before your fingers touched the grip." Leo knew he was right, but he also knew that surrender meant the end. For him, for Mikowski, for all of them. The captain had called him a child, and in that moment, Leo decided to be a soldier. He made eye contact with Mikowski and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod towards the MP40. Mikowski's eyes widened slightly. He understood. It was insanity, but it was all they had. Leo took a deep breath. He looked the German captain directly in the eye. "You're right," Leo said, his voice surprisingly steady. "It is over." He began to slowly raise his hands in surrender. The captain's smile widened a fraction, a look of satisfaction on his face. It was the distraction Leo needed. As the captain's focus shifted for a split second to Leo's raised hands, Mikowski moved. He didn't go for his pistol. He shouted, "Down!" and threw himself sideways, tackling Reyes and Simpson to the ground. At the same moment, Leo dropped his own raised hands and dove, not for cover, but directly towards the fallen MP40. The German captain, reacting with lightning speed, swung his weapon towards Leo, his finger tightening on the trigger. But Leo was already in motion. He hit the dirt, his hand closing around the cold, hard metal of the German submachine gun. He rolled onto his back, bringing the weapon up as the captain's MP40 began to spit fire. The world dissolved into a deafening exchange of automatic weapons fire. Leo squeezed the trigger and held it, the MP40 bucking in his hands, spraying a wild arc of 9mm rounds across the clearing. He wasn't aiming to hit anyone. He was aiming to survive, to create chaos. The German soldiers, caught by surprise, returned fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the night like strobes. Bullets tore through the air. Leo felt a searing hot pain rip across his thigh, but he kept firing, sweeping the barrel back and forth. He saw the German captain stagger, hit in the shoulder, his shot going wide. From the ground, Makowski, Reyes, and Simpson added their own fire, their M1s cracking sharply. The clearing became a whirlwind of confusion and death. In the span of 10 seconds, it was over. The sudden, violent outburst of fire had given them a slim advantage. 3 of the surrounding Germans were down. The others, disoriented and with their officer wounded, hesitated for a critical moment. "Fall back, now!" Makowski yelled, grabbing Leo by the collar and hauling him to his feet. Leo's legs screamed in protest, but he ran, limping, clutching the captured MP40, following Makowski and the others as they crashed headlong into the blackness of the forest, leaving the fire, the bodies, and the stunned Germans behind. They ran until their lungs felt like they would burst, not stopping, not looking back, driven by the pure animal instinct to live. Finally, after an eternity, Makowski signaled a halt. They collapsed, gasping, behind a dense thicket, listening for pursuit. There was none. They had done it. They had escaped. Leo lay on his back, staring up at the few stars visible through the canopy, his leg throbbing with a warm, wet pain. He was alive. They were all alive. Sergeant Makowski looked over at him, his face etched with exhaustion, and something else, something like awe. "Jenkins," he panted, "I don't know how you did it, but you saved us, every last one of us." The journey back to American lines was a slow, painful ordeal, a nightmare of navigating by the stars and avoiding German patrols. But they made it. When they finally stumbled into a forward outpost of the 1st Division, ragged, bleeding, and hollow-eyed, they were greeted as ghosts. The 2nd Platoon had been written off, presumed lost. The story of the 17-year-old scout who had saved an entire platoon from annihilation began to spread through the ranks, a tiny spark of legend in the grim, bloody narrative of the Hürtgen Forest. Leo Jenkins received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions that day. But the real reward was in the hands of the men who shook his, in the nods of respect from grizzled veterans, and in the simple, profound knowledge that he had stared into the abyss and had not blanked. He was just a boy from Biloxi, but in the green hell of the Hürtgen, he had become a man and a hero.